metaphor of a long-standing problem in computer science, which is known as robust query processing. And this is work that we have done in our this is work that has been done over the course of the last couple of years in our database systems lab at the Indian Institute of Science. To kind of motivate and give you a high-level view of what I'll be discussing in the rest of the talk, let me start off with a very strange example. Okay? Nothing to do with databases or computer science. Take your mind back to the Commonwealth Games which were held in 2010. And those of you who are old enough to read newspapers at that time would remember that there was a lot of discussion, again, both in the popular press as well as in the news, in Parliament, many other bodies and so on, about exactly what was the expense of these Commonwealth Games. So if you ask the government, the valuation was something like 5,000 crores. And we obviously knew that that was a completely ridiculous number, it's far too low. This would not even cover the bribes that we should take care of the first level of officials. How can this be sufficient to hold the entire games? So we knew that this was a serious undervaluation. This is usually what you get with government estimates. But on the other hand, if you ask our hyperventilating media, especially with the nowadays that we have the 24-hour news channels, as to what their estimate was of the overall expense of the games, then you saw that the media speculation was around 70,000 crores. In 2010, this looked a ridiculously large number. Although in hindsight and looking at subsequent scams, maybe this was a fairly small number now that we have reached things like 1,84,000 crores in the 2G scam and so on. But in 2010, this looked way too large to have any sense at all. So now, if you look at these two numbers, you would say that, look, they're completely poles apart, they're completely irrational. What do I do with it? I just throw them in the trash can and move on with this. But what I'll make the claim is that you can take these two ridiculous numbers, and then if you take the geometric mean of these two numbers, you come up with 18,700 crores. And believe it or not, this is almost exactly the same value that was proposed by the Comptroller and Auditor General, that is the CAG. After a lot of looking through the facts and the documents, the CAG audit came up with 18,500 crores. So as you can see, with two ridiculous numbers, you're still able to come up with something that was extremely meaningful at the end. By themselves, if you had only one of these two numbers, it would have been of no use. You need both these irrational things to come together, then you can produce something that is quite useful, because the irrationality of the two cancel each other away. Okay, so this is the background. So now, let me come to database systems. So it's possible that given the heterogeneous audience here, that many of you would not be familiar with the delights of these systems. Okay? So I'll give you the world's quickest overview of what a database management system, or DBMS as it's more affectionately known actually amongst in the real world. So these are extremely large and extremely complex software systems running to millions of lines of code, and they are basically meant to be able to handle enterprise data through its entire life cycle, ranging from capturing the data, storing it, asking questions of it, and maintaining the data. Okay? So as a typical example that most of you are already using today, think of your net banking or your train reservations through IRCTC and so on. All of that is being done through database management systems. So they also form the cornerstone of the computer industry. You find that the majority of the computational, financial, and intellectual resources of the entire software industry are largely devoted to this single application of database systems. So the reason that some of the names that you see here reflect the kinds of software products that are available in the market. So on the commercial front, you have DB2, which comes from IBM. Then you have SQL Server from Microsoft. Then there's SQL MX from Hewlett Packard. And Oracle has Exadata, which is very popular in India. And then SAP has HANA, and then they bought Sybase IQ a few years ago, and so on. Okay. Then you also have free software coming in from the public domain, like PostgreSQL, MySQL. MySQL is actually being used in the MSc Computer Science courses in the National College nowadays. And then there's also Berkeley DB. So the reason that database systems are so ubiquitously popular is that they come armed with a large variety of goodies, and I won't go through all of them, but I just point out two very important facets of database systems. The first is that the only reason that you are able to sleep peacefully at night, for those of you who do sleep at night and are not too busy watching TV or doing assignments for the courses here, is that database systems give you peace of mind. And that is because any changes that you make to the database system, like when you are doing net banking and so on, or trying to bring your Swiss bank accounts back to India and stuff like this, any changes to the database systems are guaranteed to be immune to any subsequent system failures. So whether you have the bus strike by KSRTC, whether you have an earthquake, or whether you have a volcano, or whether the world ends, it doesn't matter. The database system will always make sure that any changes you make to the system are cast in stone and will remain forever. So in that sense, you can essentially think of it as a bulletproof system that no matter what happens subsequently, all the changes that you have made to this to the data or the information that's available within the database system are going to be there for perpetuity. So in a sense, you can think of it as the Sri Sri Ravi Shankar of the information world, minus the long hair, of course. The other reason that database systems are extremely popular, this is what I focus on for the rest of the talk, is that they support what is called as declarative access. That is, you only state what you want without specifying the means to achieve this target. So this is very different from the standard kinds of programming that people do, which is what is called as imperative programming. So let's say, for example, you wanted to multiply two matrices and you wanted to write a program for them. What would you do? You declare the variables for these two matrices, and then you would say, I will do the multiplication of each row of the matrix, of the first matrix with the column of the second matrix, and add up all these minor products, and then take the aggregate and so on. So each step of the way you have to specify in order to achieve the final goal, which is to multiply these two matrices. Whereas in database systems, it's completely different. You only say that I want to multiply two matrices, and I don't want to tell you how to do it. That's up to the system to figure out. So this is very similar to the way that at least in IISc, the way that professors talk to PhD students is that you say, first the student comes and says, can I join you? Says, well, sure, why not? And after a few weeks, they gather up the courage to come and say, okay, how do I write a good thesis? What will we say? We say, just go write a great thesis, don't ask me how, that's not my job. Okay? This is a declarative statement, that is, you go and do this, don't ask us the means to achieve this goal. I'm sure that at least in National College, the professors are much better to actually write a thesis for the students, but it's not prevalent everywhere. So now, if you look at database systems, one brand or certain version of database systems called relational database systems, or RDBMS, is essentially what has captured the marketplace in the last 50 years or so. So this is based on the mathematical notion of first order logic, augmented with existential and universal quantifiers. And this was invented by Ted Cott of IBM Research. So this is the IBM Albertin Research Center on the west coast of the US, and for which he received the Turing Award, which is the equivalent to the Nobel Prize in Computer Science, in 1981, which has also led the people in the database community to say that we believe in God and not God. So what is the magic within the relational systems? Is that essentially it's a very simple one. Okay? So it's similar to the Unix operating system, which some of you may be familiar with. The beauty of Unix was its simplicity. Okay? Just like the same way when you look at Google, why was it successful compared to Yahoo? Simply because it had no clutter in its pages. It just had a text box saying search, and that's it. Everything else was white space. Whereas Yahoo would have all these kinds of banners and flickering icons all over the page, and there's a tremendous amount of clutter there. So in the same way, what Ted Cott did was to say that let's remove all the clutter and focus only on the organic foundations of database systems. And basically what he said is that let us make sure that data is stored in a set of relations. So this is the mathematical notion of relation, but for the purpose of this talk, you can think of relations as essentially tables. That is, tables with rows and columns. And these tables have attributes or columns, and there are relationships between the tables as well as constraints. So to make this concrete, here is a simple database which shows you a university database which has information about students. So this is the student table which has the roll number of the student, the name and the address. Similarly, you have a course table which has the course number, what is the title of the course and how many credits are associated with the course. And then you have this register table which tells you which student has registered for which course and what is the grade that he or she achieves in this course at the end of the semester. So as you can see, I have instantiated some of the rows of these tables. Okay? So you can see that here is Jayant from Bangalore taking the database course, and since I made up the slide, I gave myself an A+ in the course. Okay? So that was the advantage of making the slide myself. Now the question is that this is a way for storing the data in the database system. Okay? But it's not like a government files where you once you store it, you put it in the attic and then you tie it up with some kind of colored thread and then you never open it later. The whole idea for database system is that you should be constantly be able to ask questions of the data there. So the interface, which is called as the query interface to database systems, is what is called as the structured query language, or SQL for short. Some people call it SQL, others call it SQL. This was again invented by IBM. This is the IBM Alfred Research Center in the late 70s. So for example, let's say you just wanted to list, maybe you're the vice chancellor and you want to list the names of the students and the courses that they're taking, then you would give a set of commands that you see here. Okay? The stuff that you see in the blue here are essentially keywords to be informing the underlying computational system as to what you're trying to do. But what you really need to look at is the stuff in orange here. And all that this says in simple English is to say that pull out the names of the students and the titles of the courses. Where should they pull this out from? The information is lying here in the student table, in the course table, in the register table. This is the source of the information. And in order to make semantic sense of what you're pulling out from here, these are the predicates that need to be applied to make sure that you're talking about the same student and the same course. So what we are saying here is that the student roll number that is here should match to the register roll number that you see here, and the course number that you see here should be the same as the course number that you see here. Then you output the name of the student and the associated title of the course. Okay? So all that you are doing is to essentially, what is called in the database jargon, is joining the information between these various tables. So now here's the key, is that unlike the normal programming languages you are used to, like Java, C++, what have you, SQL is a declarative language. It only specifies the target goal without specifying the means to achieve the goal. So for example, in this query that we just saw, which was to pull out the names of the students and the titles of the courses, what was left unspecified in this description is that in what sequence should the information be joined, okay, or combined together. So you notice here, you have to combine the information of student with register and also the information of register with course. We did not specify which sequence should be done. So for example, one order in which you would have done this join, or one sequence in which you would have done it, is to say that let me join the student table. So S stands for student, R stands for register, and C for course. The symbol that you see here, that is the bow tie symbol, essentially is the represents this joining operation of two different tables. So here we are saying join student with relation with the register table first, so that's within the inner brackets, and then join it with the course table. Okay? That's the sequence of operations. But you might say, no, for Vastu reasons, I don't like this sequence. I might want to do it instead that I want to join the register table with the course relation first, that is to implement this predicate first, and then join it with the student table, which is the second predicate. It's important to note that the output of these two are exactly the same, okay? Because the join operator is both associative and commutative. So given those algebraic properties, what you get out from the two of them would be identical. But the time taken to process this sequence or the alternative sequence would be enormously different. Okay? So this would probably be completed maybe in, let's say, a few seconds, whereas to complete this sequence might take you a few hundred years. Hoping that the computer system would not have rebooted it within that time, this is the amount of time that it would take to complete the operations. So the output is the same, but the amount of time taken to produce it would be wildly different. Even if you did decide the sequence and saying that, okay, this is the sequence I like, maybe it's this one, notice that this join operator of combining two tables is a logical notion. It is just saying that I want to make sure that the roll number here matches to the roll number there, or the course number here matches to the course number there. To implement this join, there are lots of different physical implementations that are available in the database literature. So they have various names. One of them is called nested loops, which is essentially two pointers going on in a nested fashion. Or there is sort merge, there is hash join, there is index join, there is semi join, and so on. Pretty much in the 1970s and 80s, everybody and their grandmother were producing new join algorithms because that had become a cottage industry. Okay. A few of them have survived in the commercial world, but still there's about half a dozen different choices that one can make. So now the question is that, given that you specified only this query, you have not told them what sequence should be used to implement the query. You have also not specified the technique. All this is magically done for you within the database engine by a component called the database query optimizer. Okay? And this identifies the optimal evaluation strategy, which is usually also known as the query execution plan. So I have used the word plan in the remainder of the talk to essentially refer to the ideal strategy to implement a particular query. So now the question is that, what does it mean to be optimal? For the purpose of this talk, we'll assume that this is the response time of the query. That is, how much time does it take to, after you have submitted this query to the database system, how much time does it take for the results to come back to you? So to make this complete, here is a sample picture of an query execution plan. This will always be a tree, and this will be a tree of operators. And at the base, or the leaves of this tree, you will have the different tables which are being specified by the user in the SQL query. So for example, you find the student table here, the course table, and register table. And what this tree is saying in simple English is that you first take a sequential scan. So it basically means that go from one end to the other of the register table, do a sorting of the table, then do a merge join with the course table. So notice now that you are doing physical implementations. First you are saying you should combine course and register first. So the sequence will be decided. And then you are saying, I specifically want to use the merge join here. Not some other flavor. I want exactly chocolate flavor and not vanilla or pineapple or anything else. And then you are saying that, okay, now do a hash join, which is a different join implementation with the student table, and out it starts. So again, the details are not important. What is important to realize is that there is a plan in place, and the database system has decided that this is one possible way of executing your target goal in order to achieve these ends. You also notice that each of the nodes here is annotated with two numbers. There is a red number and a green number. Okay? The red number, which is called the cost, tells you how much time is going to be taken to process the set of data that has come to you and send it upstream, send it downstream to the next node in the tree that you have. So the data flows along the arrows that you see here. So the cost of 6,834 that you see here is telling you that it takes roughly 6,800 units of time to do the entire processing of the student table and then send the information on to the next operator downstream, which is the hash join. Whereas what the card annotation tells you is that it's the amount of data that is going to be sent from here to here. So one is telling you the cost of doing the operation, the other is telling you how much is going to be forwarded to the next operator downstream. So think of it like a traffic signal. One is the amount of time that it takes for the light to change. The other is that what is the volume of traffic that is coming into the intersection. Okay. So given this, the way that database systems operate is that you come in and give your SQL query, which as I said is the standard intergalactic interface to database systems. This is the declarative query queue, where you just say, give me this, I don't want to know anything beyond that. It's up to you to go and figure out the best possible way to do it. There's this magical component which is hidden deep down inside the database engine. You'll often not know that it's even existing there. It uses this mathematical notion of a dynamic programming methodology to sift through all the different possible plans, okay? Because there are an exponential number of plans that are available there. It's a very large search space. Many different plans are available, and it carefully goes through in principle through all of them and tries to pick out the optimal plan. And by what I mean by optimal plan, the optimal plan is the one which is going to expected to have the least response time, that is going to give you the results in the fastest in the fastest time possible with regard to coming back and giving you the answer. So this is what the min cost here means, that is optimal with regard to this metric of being able to respond to you the quickest. So there are two inputs to this query optimizer box that you see here. One is that you need to estimate two numbers. So you saw those two annotations I had. One was the cost annotation, another was the cardinality annotation. So one told you how much work it took to go through the node, other said how much data you're going to be bringing down straight through this set of operators. So if you look at the execution cost, if you need to estimate it, that's primarily a function of what is the kind of hardware you have. Okay? Is it, for example, is it a superscalar processor? Does it have solid-state disks? Is it specialized kind of non-volatile memory, whatever, and so on. So it's a function of the hardware and the specific database engine that you're using. Is it DB2 from IBM? Is it SQL Server from Microsoft? Is it Exadata from Oracle, and so on. But this is largely a fixed operation because you have bought the database engine, you have bought the hardware, and you have populated the database on top of it. The second thing that you need to also estimate, as I said, is that how much data you're going to be sending. You had some input and some output data is going to be thrown to the operators that are downstream in the stream. Okay? So this is the second estimation that we need to make, and this depends now on the data itself, because it depends on what is the kind of distributions that you have in the data and the correlations that exist across these columns. So now what you find in the real world, which no database company will admit to you, is that you thought that you were getting the optimal plan or algorithm by which to implement the query that you had given to the database system, and you thought that you would get it back in the fastest time possible. But this supposedly optimal plan choice, which is what you have been promised, will often turn out at runtime, when you actually execute the query, to be highly suboptimal. So you started off with wonderful ideas and principles and said, oh, this is a great way to achieve these goals. But when you actually implement them, you find that they're often much worse. And when I say much worse, I really mean much worse. 1,000 times slower. Okay? Not a few times slower, saying that I take another 20 seconds here or a few minutes there. Okay? It could easily be 1,000 times slower than the real ideal choice that you would have known through hindsight, which is the best way to have executed this query. So now you might wonder, where is the problem coming from? Why is it that you are getting such slowdowns? The reason is that there could be errors in those two numbers that we are looking at each node of the query execution plan. That is the cost annotation and the cardinality association. So the cost model will often have errors, but these errors are fairly limited because they depend on your modeling of the underlying hardware, which you know pretty well, and the modeling of the database engine, which is again a fairly well-known quantity. But the problem is that with regard to the cardinality model, where you have to guess, given a certain amount of data coming in, how much will go out, then this can potentially have a huge impact in terms of very large errors. The reason that the errors come in are kind of listed here. I won't go through these technical details, but this has been a long-standing problem in the database community, is that because of these errors, you have even people like Dr. Guy Lohmann, whose picture you see here. He's the father of the IBM's DB2 product with regard to the query optimizer and execution component. And he wrote an article about 2 years ago where he said that is query optimization a solved problem? And then you can see he answers it himself in fairly colorful language by saying that the root of all evil, the Achilles heel of query optimization, is the estimation of all these cardinality values that you saw, which were the annotations in the nodes that you had in the query execution plan. And in fact, he says that the model can easily introduce errors of many orders of magnitude. So again, we're not talking about small mistakes here. These are humongous mistakes. Okay? And the question is that with such errors, and he ends off in this very cynical note, is that it's not that why did the optimizer pick a bad plan? Because you might think that this is a rare case, once in a blue moon, it's possible that maybe the database system gave you a bad strategy to achieve your goal. In fact, what he says is the opposite. He says that you are very lucky, you must go to Tirupati and come back if you need to get a good plan from the database system. Okay? This, no database system vendor will ever tell you. They will say that, here is the plan, this is wonderful. Now, suppose you say, I'm not sure whether it's wonderful or not, is this really the best or not? What will the database vendor tell you? He said, you go find a better one. Right? And the problem here is there is no way for you to compare, because the search space is essentially in the billions of different strategies, and there are very few good strategies available for you to be able to find that is as bad as trying to do the query in the first place. So often what you find is that you have to live with what you get, cross your fingers and hope that it works out. But what happens in the database world is that, like in India, worst case is often average case here. And what I mean by that is that typically you get horrible results. It's not that you have rare problems. All the time you have problems. Okay? If you are lucky if you get the database system to work well for you. But what I'd like to point out to you is that this is not a problem that is specific to database systems. Look at all the recent election predictions for the last few years. Okay? You have all these wonderful statisticians, exit polling, psychologists, Pranay Royce, Yogendra Yadavs, everybody is there. Okay? People who have very good statistical background. Okay? Let's look at how well they predicted the elections, which is far easier to predict compared to a database system which has to worry about mathematical correlations and distributions for humongous pieces of data. Look at the Tamil Nadu Assembly elections in 2011, where they had of the order of around 230 seats to be decided. In the lead up to the polls, you find that everybody was saying that it's a very close race. Even after the polls, they said it's too hard to call. It's 50-50 between the DMK and AIADMK. Luckily, Jayalalitha did not listen to any of these people, okay, did not read any of this. And in fact, if you look at the ORG poll, they said 120 seats for DMK, slight edge over 110 for the AIADMK. Final results were a landslide, which took everybody by surprise. Even Jayalalitha was shocked. Okay, 203 for the AIADMK and a paltry 30 for the DMK. Closer in time, look at the Delhi Assembly elections, which was about a year ago. 76 were in contention here. Again, you found all the polling agencies, and we have a large number of them, both the pre-polls and post-polls. Everybody claimed essentially it's a toss-up race. Okay? You found that the C-voter poll actually again gave a slight edge to the BJP, saying that because they're the party in power in the central government, it's likely that the voters would be influenced by that and would probably have a few more votes coming their way. So you have 26 for the BJP and the 31 for the AAP. Again, it looked like Kejriwal had not listened to any of these polling agencies. We found that it's not just a small difference. The results were a landslide. They decimated the opposition. There was 67 for AAP, and just to make sure that they had some opposition, they said, okay, give you a few seats because we want somebody to beat up on within the assembly. It's just 3 here. How do you explain these results? These are all estimations. These are statistical estimations done with large groups of people who are supposedly knowing what they're doing. So they make not small errors, but humongous errors. Hopefully this is rare in the election world, although nowadays we find that this is actually not the case. Virtually every election is very poorly guessed. Even the recent elections that we had in Bihar and so on, we found there were wildly varying estimates based on which political party you are from or which news agency you are from. Okay? Even till the last day, N. Ram was on the TV channel saying that I think DMK will do very well. Okay? So the problem is that if this is happening here, which is a fairly tight domain where you know all the parties in play, you know the issues which are there, you know the voters, you're checking with them, and you're making such mistakes, have some pity for the poor database system which has to deal with petabytes of data with large amounts of correlation across different columns, various kinds of distributions and so on. Very hard to get it right. So that's why I keep saying is that worst case is the average case in the sense that almost always you will get it horribly wrong. Not just wrong, but horribly wrong. Okay, so what has the database research community been doing over the last 30 years to fix this problem? There's been lots of research. Okay? As I said, everybody and their grandmother have been working on this problem. So one approach was to say that let's come up with better mathematical techniques. Let's do more refined estimation, for example, by using techniques like wavelets, or I can use self-tuning autonomic systems, or I can use deep learning kind of histograms and so on. Okay? And the list that you see here refers to different top conferences in the database community, which are called like SIGMOD, VLDB, ICD, and so on. These are all the top research forums in the world. And the years that you see here mention when the first papers on this new techniques were presented in these conferences. You can see that over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of work in trying to come up with better mathematical ways to do the estimation. So that's one approach. The other is to say that, well, look, can I instead come up with strategies that even in spite of errors that are coming into the system with regard to these estimation techniques, are reasonably good over large spectrums of the parameter space. So again, you will see that right from Sigmod 1994, which is about 22 years ago, there have been a large number of papers which try to come up with more robust plans, which are in some sense not too sensitive to the errors that you make in the cardinality estimation. Or the third approach is to say that let's make these assumptions first, let's start running the plan that we had thought was the best choice. As I start running the plan, I start checking whether the numbers that I'm getting are the same as or similar to the numbers that I had estimated them to be. So if I had thought that 1,000 rows of a student will pass through this particular filter, I keep checking whether the output in the actual plan that I'm executing, is it also similar to 1,000 or not. So if I see only 1 or if I see 10,000, then I know that I've made a bad mistake. So I basically validate what I'm getting with what I estimated it to be. And if I find that there is a big discrepancy, then I go back to the drawing board and say I will do this process all over again. But now I do know some of the values that were only estimated before. Now I know that 10,000 students will cross this barrier. Earlier I had estimated it to be 1,000, the estimate was wrong, but from the real world data I actually know how much I've gone through. So I take the 10,000, fit it back into my model, and then do the rest of the optimization process again. So there are well-known techniques called POP and RIO, which stand for progressive optimization, re-optimization, and so on. So these are the different ways by which people have tried to attack this problem. So again, since many of you may not be familiar with the database research literature, let me just put it to you in the Indian cricketing context. You can think of these three techniques as these three kinds of players. The first is like VVS Lakshman, come up with better mathematical techniques, more elegance, more sophistication. You know that VVS Lakshman was our most elegant player. He used to late cut the ball very late, sometimes even after it hit the wicket, right? So he was the quintessential stylish batsman. Whereas, suppose you didn't know how the wicket was going to behave, whether it was going to be a bouncy wicket or a flat and so on, then your best bet was always to go with Rahul Dravid first because he's a man for all seasons. So this is the choice that you would make, so that's what people here would do. Whereas we know that Dhoni is the master of the ability to switch gears at any time depending on the kind of situation the match is in, whether he needs to hit out or whether he needs to buckle down or whether he needs to just run away or whatever else he needs to do. So Dhoni was always credited on his quick thinking that based on the circumstances he finds himself in, changes the plan. Okay? That's the runtime way of optimization. But the problem with all of this is, just like with our Indian cricket team is, they never gave you guarantees. Right? They're all exceptionally good players, but they could not guarantee whether you would win or not. Okay? And that's the difficulty that you see here is that there are extremely interesting ideas both from the mathematical perspective, the implementation outlook, or from the way that they've approached the statistical problem itself. But the common implication amongst all of them is that they lack guarantees. So you always have to go to Tirupati first before you can come and use the system and hope to get good answers. So what we have done in the course of the last few years is that our lab has solved this classical problem in the sense that it's about close to 40 years old by developing a new query processing technique which is called as plan to base, and I'll show you why it's called plan to base in the rest of the talk. And the basic idea here is that give up on this problem. So what I showed you earlier is that you wanted to make estimates and you had many different ways of making better and better estimates, but all of them failed in practice. So where we came in differently from what had been done in the past is to say that forget this problem, give up on it. Nobody can get it right except Rajnikant. Okay? But if you ignore him, nobody else can get this problem right. So we said that instead of trying to make estimates, go to a different strategy where you actually do a discovery of these values at runtime. Don't do anything at compile time. That is, don't do any planning. Planning doesn't help at all. Here, it's like saying that if you want to do planning to go from place A to B, and the person at place B in Bangalore asks you how much time you think it takes to reach there. There's no point doing the planning because you know that all the estimates will be widely off. You will get stuck in the majestic bus stand for long periods of time. So it's better to figure out dynamically using Google Maps what is the best way to reach the next step. So that's what we have done here, is that you do a discovery process instead of a prediction process. And because of this, you can actually get, for the first time, performance guarantees with regard to the ideal situation. What we mean by ideal is that God already knows all the correct values in advance. Knows the cardinality numbers correctly, knows the cost values correctly, and so on. So compared to the plan that God would have used, which is equivalent to the plan that you would have used in hindsight, how well can you do? And for the first time, we can actually provide performance guarantees. And as I'll show you in the rest of this talk, if you assume that in the simple case where you have one particular cardinality value that you need to estimate correctly, we can provide a relative guarantee of 4. That is, we can always be 25% of God in terms of the quality of the response with regard to the time that it takes to produce the answer. So if God could do it in X seconds, we will do it definitely in less than 4X seconds. And in fact, this is only the mathematical bound. If you actually look at the empirical performance using experiments with real-world database systems, it's well within this number. Okay. So this brings me to the main objective of this talk, is to tell you about planned bouquets, which we claim is a fragrant approach to this notion of robust query processing. And this actually forms the PhD thesis work of Anshuman Dutt, who is a recently graduate student from our lab, who has now moved on to Microsoft Research in the US. So the basic idea here is that let's just assume that you have a simple relational database. So as I told you earlier, there are lots of different tables. Tables are columns and attributes, and then you try to connect all the information in these tables. So here is the manufacturing database. So not surprisingly, you have tables about customers, about suppliers. Suppliers are supplying parts, customers are supplying orders and parts, and each order is broken up into separate items, which is here. So this is a typical manufacturing database. And let's say you wanted to ask the question that you see here, which is an SQL query. So again, in simple English, what this is saying is that give me the information coming from the 3 different tables. That is the parts table, the orders table, and the line item table. Put all the information together. How do I put the information together? By using these predicates. And what is most important is the last one here, which says that the retail price of the part should be less than 1,000. So all that this is saying in simple English is, give me all the details of cheap parts. That's all that is saying, which cost less than 1,000. So in order to evaluate this query and come up with a good strategy for computing the results, what the database system has to do is that it has to go to this query optimizer, which is a magical box sitting inside the engine, which you would never see because it's under the covers. And then that database system has to figure out and estimate many different numbers. The first number that it needs to figure out is that how many rows there are, or what is the content of information in the part table and in the line item table. This is easy to do because these are metadata statistics that are always kept by all database systems, and it's easy to maintain. So take my word for it. So that's why we have put a green tick here saying that I know the input. I know how many students are coming into this course, I know how many students are coming in here. That's easy to do. But then as we go up the tree, now we need to keep making estimates. And remember that all these errors that you have keep propagating up the tree and multiplying. So the other problem that we have here is that the errors get multiplied as we go up the tree. So the first thing that we need to evaluate is that, given that you said that the retail price should be less than 1,000, how many of the parts would satisfy this requirement? So the number of parts that you have here is 20,000. That's the initial number of parts. You need to estimate how many of these parts are actually cheap parts. Here, that's the first estimation you need to make, and here what the database system has done is to say that I think it's 4,000 out of the 20,000. That is, 20% of the parts are cheap. That's what it estimates. This is usually a mistake. And as I said, we are not talking about small mistakes, saying that, oh, it was actually the 3,900 instead of 4,000, or it was 4,100 instead of 4,000. If you got numbers like that, you are fine. We will actually estimate that the real value could be 19,999. That's the kind of mistakes we have. Magnificent mistakes. Okay? Once you do this estimation here, you go to the next level. Now you need to combine 2 different tables, and you need to estimate how much will they produce. Okay? So here is the father, here is the mother. You need to estimate how many children will be produced. So unless you are Gandhari, you will not be making good estimates here. How would you know that you would have a case where you have 100 children coming out to the other end? And as I said, this is routinely the case that you would be getting in the database. And then, if you survive this experience, you have to make one more estimate here for the 3rd level for combining it with the orders table and so on. So all the X's that you see here are places where you are making estimates, and those estimates are as bad as I said, flipping a coin. So what does the database system do? How does it do the estimation? Because it doesn't have any better information, it assumes that the data is uniformly distributed. So it assumes, for example, that all the customer orders are equally likely for all the prices. And based on this, it makes an assumption that if you combine this part table and this line item table that you saw here for the cheap parts, the output will be 1.2 million rows. This is what will come out at the other end. But what you often find in practice, as I said, is that this is the planning stage, this is the execution stage. At the execution stage, you might find that this is a country like Germany which does not believe in cheap parts at all. There are no orders for cheap parts, zero. In which case it means that you made a huge overestimate. You thought 1.2 million was coming out, nothing came out the other end. You might have the other extreme where you go to Greece instead, where all parts are by definition have to be cheap because there are no money in the country anyways, right? All the orders correspond to cheap parts now, which then means that you get 6 million rows here. So notice that we estimated it to be 1.2 million. It could be as low as 0, it could be as high as 6 million. As I said, routinely you will get these kinds of situations. It is not once in a blue moon kinds of scenarios. And as I said, here it's a huge underestimate. Okay. So given this background, here is the problem framework. So what we'll do is that instead of using this notion of what we call as cardinality, which is essentially the amount of data that's going from one node to the next of this tree, we'll use a normalized version for selectivity, which is saying that what is the fraction of the output rows compared to the input that we are producing in terms of coming through the system. Okay, so just to make this clear, the input here is 20,000 rows and the output is 4,000 rows. That's what is going out. So what you would say is that instead of saying 4,000 rows are coming out, you would say 4,000 normalized to the 20,000. That's the incoming value, which means that this is 20%. So essentially selectivity is a fractional value, say that given an input, what is the fractional output that's coming out here, rather than the absolute value. So this is the relative value instead of the absolute value, which is 4,000. So if you do this, now for this particular query that I showed you earlier, you can now draw a three-dimensional space. What are the three dimensions? Three dimensions are the axis on which you have to make predictions and estimates. You have to estimate, first of all, how many parts will have a price less than 1,000. That is the axis that you see here. Again, it can range from 0 to 100%. 100% means all the parts are cheap. 0% means none of the parts are cheap. Similarly, you have to estimate the number of rows that will come out when you combine the information between part and line item. So P stands for part and L stands for line item. This is another axis. This is the first joint estimate that you have to make. The other joint estimate you have to make was line item with orders that you see here. So these are the three different estimates that you have to make. This gives you a three-dimensional space. Now the question is that what is the performance metric that you have? What the database system will do is that it will estimate some location in the space. It says, I think this is how many of the parts will be cheap. This is what I think will happen when these two tables join together. Okay, all these are estimates that are made based on some crude statistical foundations. So this is the estimated location, that is Q sub E. So this is the query located at some location E. And then Q sub A will tell you actually what happens when you execute the query. Okay, so this is the planning stage and this is the execution stage. So for example, if you see in this particular case, the database system had thought that this query is located at 5, 2 and 8 in this three-dimensional space. Whereas to the horror of the user, you found out that at runtime, this is the actual location, would be 75, 62 and 85. So let's assume that the best strategy here was capital P, that's the plan, which is the optimal at the estimated location. That is what we are referring to here. And this one is the optimal plan at this location. So now the problem that you are having is that because you estimated it to be located here, you would have used this plan at this location. So you're using a strategy which is very good in this location at some remote location where it might be terrible. So what is the suboptimality you are getting? The suboptimality that you are getting is that you are using this P sub OE, that is the optimal plan here at this location, that is the cost or the running time of the query here, compared to what would God have used. God would already know that this is the correct location, would have used the ideal plan which is here. So you want to compare the running time of your estimated strategy compared to the ideal strategy. Okay. This is the suboptimality that you will have. Obviously, the best value you can get is 1, but you can be as bad as infinity here at the other end. So what we do is that this was for a particular pair of locations, estimated location actual. Suppose you do it over all pairs of locations in this 3-dimensional space. That is what we call as the maximum suboptimality. That is, take the max of these values over every pair of values or locations within this space. Okay. This is the absolute horror situation that you can have. And what we want to do is to say, can you bound that performance there to be something which is not ridiculously large. Okay? Because we know that it can be between 1 and a very large number. Can you make sure that it's bounded within a reasonably small number? So there's, maybe I'll just skip this part here. So now let's look at what happens with current database systems. And for simplicity, I just assume that you are making only a mistake on one dimension. So what was the one dimension? That was the number of parts whose retail price was less than 1,000. That's the number of cheap parts. We just assume that that is the predicate that was here, and that would have varying values. As I said, it can go all the way from 0%, where none of the parts were cheap, all the way to 100%, where all the parts are cheap. So if you put that on the x-axis, so the x-axis you see the selectivity going from 0 all the way to 100 of this particular predicate. On the y-axis, what you have is the running time of the query for different values here. Okay? So what it says is that if there is a very low selectivity value, it means that very few of the word orders are qualified, which means that the amount of data processing you have to do is very small. Okay? So it's not surprising that the time taken to execute the query is very small, which is what you see here. But as you go here, it means you are pumping in more and more data, more and more parts you find to be actually cheap, which means that the cost keeps rising. Okay? So this green curve is what you see is the best possible performance that you could get for each of these selectivities. So when you say cost here, think of it as running time. And notice that this running time is on a log scale. Okay? So this is not on a linear axis, but this is on a log scale. And the way that it would have worked is that there are different plans that are optimal in each of these regions. For the selectivities going from 0.01 to roughly around 0.2, there is a plan P1 which has this tree structure, which is the best possible strategy. That is what is giving you this green curve here. And notice that here the sequence is part is going to be joined with line item using nested loops, and then again with orders using nested loops. That's the first. Okay? When you move on here, what it's saying is that, oh, now a different strategy is better. Once the number of parts which are cheap exceeds this 0.2%, then I will use a different strategy. Notice that now it's parts and line item being joined with nested loops, and then there's a merge joined with orders instead. So this is a different plan. Again, all these plans will give you exactly the same answer. It's the running times that are different. So here you say that the best strategy to achieve my goals is the blue plan, which is this one. Here it's the red, and so on. And you can actually complete the rest of the diagram like this. So there's a different strategy here, here, here. So this gives you a behavior of the system over the entire space of possibilities which are here. So now, if you look at each of these ideal strategies, we knew, for example, that P1, the red plan, was very good in the low selectivity region, but subsequently it became worse and was therefore replaced by the blue plan and so on. So the plan colors that I showed you earlier were in their optimality regions. So I showed you P1 red, then P2 blue, green and so on. But if you extended their own behavior over the entire space, you see that blue is not so good in the beginning, which is why you didn't choose it. Then it comes into its own, then it becomes worse and so on. And look at green, for example, it's horrible for 90% of the space, but in the end, it becomes the best. Okay? So you can think of this as different exams, and there are toppers for each of these exams. Each topper does poorly in the other places, but does very well in his or her own chosen field. So that is what you see. P1 is very good here, P2 is good here, P3 is good here, P4 is good here, P5 is good here, and so on. So now the difficulty that comes in the real world is that often, so this was the ideal curve that you had, which is what God would have been able to produce because knowing the correct values in advance. What would today's database systems do? Instead, they would give you this red curve. And notice that this is again on a log scale here. This is what you would get. So to make this complete, let's look at this corner here. What happened here was that you thought that the selectivity was very low. You thought that only very few parts are cheap. But so that is why Q sub E, the estimated location, is 1%. But later you found that almost all the parts are cheap. This you find only at runtime, because once you start actually looking at the data, you realize, oh my god, this is what is happening, right? So this is 99%, which means that you use the plan which was, the red plan which was here, which was very good here, you used it in this location. Okay? So in a case where you needed to conserve wickets, you have now gone and done a hit out or get out strategy. So you did the Virendra Sehwag thing, because Virendra Sehwag's batting was independent of the situation of the game, right? It did not matter what was there. So this is what you have done here, is that you have committed harakiri by taking something which was very good in this location and using it here. And because of doing that, you now find that the performance is at this level, which is 20 times worse than what you should have had. So you come to the other extreme here, you do the opposite mistake. You thought that most of the parts were cheap, but actually at runtime you find that very few parts are cheap. Now you find that you used the P5, the green plan here, you used it in this region, and now the scaling factor is a factor of 100. So you are 100 times slower here than the ideal solution. So that is what, so this is the maximum suboptimality you could have, and as I said, in practice you find that this is just the tip of the iceberg. With current commercial systems, you can easily get 1,000. Push to it, you can get 1,000,000 times slower than what would have been the ideal choice. Okay, so now let's look at what we will do with the plan bouquet technique, which is what I will try to finish off in the next few minutes. This is our new technique that we have, which tries to address this classical problem. So we say that, okay, take that original green curve that you had. What you do is that you go and draw horizontal lines here on this picture. So this is what you can see here. You can see all these horizontal lines. The way that you draw the horizontal lines is that essentially it's a geometric progression where it doubles in each step here. Okay? Notice that this is on a log scale, so that's why they're all equidistant here. So essentially this is 12,000, 24,000, 48,000, 96,000 and so on. So you just take this curve and you keep drawing these horizontal lines, which is essentially a doubling algorithm. Okay? Each line is double the cost of the previous line. You look at the intersection of these lines with the curve that you have. And you'll find that there will be a particular plan located there. So for example, the first 4 cuts will have the plan P1, which is ideal here, whereas the 5th cut will be cutting P2, 6th will be P3, and then the 7th will be P5. So you find these plans at the intersection of these cuts with the ideal profile. So this is what we call as the plan bouquet, is that all the plans that appear on these cuts, that is P1, P2, P3 and P5, these form your bouquet of plans. Notice that P4 has now disappeared. And in practice, this was a Y example, you'll find that the original number of plans is very large, but what survives is a very small bouquet of plans. So now the next step is that, which is where it really becomes interesting, is let's assume that the actual location of your query was at 5%. That is, 5% of the parts were cheap. You don't know this in advance, but I'm saying that suppose somebody came and whispered in your ear that it was at 5% here. Let us look at how the plan bouquet algorithm would behave. So the first thing that it would do is that, remember we said we will not estimate anything. So what it will do is that it will execute this particular plan P1 here. But it executes it with a certain time budget. What is the budget that's given to it? It's the value of this cut that you had. What is the value of the cut? That was 12,000. So essentially I'm saying that I'll give you 12,000 rupees. Go see if you can complete this query within this time. So I give you this, but what you see is that it cannot be completed here because the selectivity is 5% here, which is way out from here. So what happens is that when we do not complete within the assigned time, we throw away the results of this execution. So you start running, you start doing all this query, and you say there's a clock. The clock says deadline is over. You're not completed the query. Throw it all away. Then what we do is that we say, okay, we say IAO, something happened wrong. I'll go to this next line here. What is this plan? It's P1, but the budget here is 24,000. So I'll now execute this plan P1 with a budget of 24,000 rupees and say keep executing and try to complete the query at least this time. What will happen? This will not finish. So what do we do again? We throw away these results. Say, oh my god, life is bad, throw it away. Go again, execute this one with double the budget, 48,000, doesn't work. Do it again. Doesn't work. And 6,000. Each time you're raising the budget, you're spending more and more money. It's not working out. Execute this P2. Now with the budget, you've gone into the lakhs. It's 1.9 lakhs. Doesn't work. It's only finally when you reach P3, which is here, which is to the right of this location, that this will finally actually complete. And now the budget is 3.8 lakhs. So think of it like being similar to what you would want to do if you wanted to pass through one of these national exams like the JEE exam and so on. So if you are a betting parent, you might say that I think my son is fairly smart, daughter is fairly smart, I only spent 12,000 rupees on the coaching class. Doesn't make it, it says, okay, actually maybe my son was not, or daughter was not as smart, let me enroll in the better coaching class, let me go with 24,000 instead. Maybe that didn't work, so you keep working your way through this. Okay? And eventually, hopefully, if you're not bankrupt by this time, you say, aha, finally with 3.8 lakhs, I got my son or daughter through the JEE exam. Okay? That is what you're doing here. Because each time you lose the money, it's not that it comes back to you, you invested in it, you went away, you keep trying again and again. So, finally, this P3 completes with a cost of 3.4 lakhs here. Now, here is the question, okay? That are these stupid ideas? And in fact, I would claim most of you are too nice to tell me that in my face, but not only are they stupid, these are extremely stupid ideas. And this is what people even in the database community would say. It's not just people who are from other walks of life. Whenever we have presented this idea to even the hardcore database researchers, they have said, you guys must be nuts. This is ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? Because you're doing lots and lots of wasted effort. You're doing huge amount of trial and errors in trying doesn't work. You keep saying IAO many more times, okay? Nothing is working out. Over the planning time, you have to spend a lot of effort to produce that curve. And then at the run time of the actual execution, you're repeatedly throwing away the work that you're doing. So if you look at this, on the surface, this is a recipe for disaster. But actually, it works surprisingly well. Why? Because there are two stupid ideas here, which cancel out their effects. That's I'll quickly finish the rest of the talk, is that, look at the total amount of investment this parent made, is that 12,000 rupees, 24,000 rupees, all the way up to here. The total cost of the plan bouquet was 7.1 lakhs. So this is the final investment that you made to be able to complete the processing. Right? And in comparison, what would God have taken? God would have said, I know in advance that it is 5%, so I will use this plan P3, which costs 3.4 lakhs. So the ratio that we have is, God spent 3.4 lakhs, I spent 7.1 lakhs, so the ratio is 2.1. Okay? And you can do some minor optimizations here that will bring it down to 1.8, but notice that it's not horrible. But then it's only within a factor of 2, okay? Not the factor of thousands that we had before, or 100 and so on. But you might say, okay, this is a cooked up example, maybe there are some other cases where you will do spectacularly badly, where you might have this ratio being of the orders of thousands. Okay? But that's actually not the case. In fact, and I'll prove it to you in the next few slides, is that if you look at the plan bouquet algorithm, which is this blue line, so green is God's line, red is the line that you'll get with today's commercial systems, blue is what you'll get with us. Okay? And as you can see, the blue is far closer to the green almost the entire space, and the worst case difference that you get is only 3.1. Whereas with the native database systems, you would have got a factor of 100 or a 20 here. Here, the worst case difference is only a factor of 3. Okay? So how do we prove this? Very simple idea here. Okay? Look at this. This is the location, which is the actual location. Think of it as the 5%. And notice that what we are doing is that, think of it as a staircase. We first give an initial investment, then we double the investment, double it, and so on. Okay? So we are essentially having an investment of A, then A plus AR, A plus AR plus AR squared, and so on, where R is the common ratio here. So this is the ratio of between the subsequent steps. You are climbing your way up this staircase to this location. And what is God doing? God is sitting on the step and laughing and saying, I know what the correct value already is. So God is the green line here, sitting already here. This is the cost. You have to complete this entire staircase. So essentially the suboptimality is the ratio of the staircase cost compared to just the step cost. And the staircase would be arbitrarily tall. Okay, so you could have hundreds of steps here, Okay? Which means that you have to climb a very tall staircase, and God has already jumped to that staircase to the correct step and says, I know where I should be. This is the difference. So now the question is that, is this a bounded value? So notice that what we have to pay is the cost of the first step getting on there, then you have to pay the cost of getting to the second one. This is the second step, third step, and so on until you reach the final step. Okay? So this is your simple geometric progression, because we said that there was a geometric ratio when you went from one step to the next. So it's a classical progression here with A, AR, AR squared, and so on. And that you know can be summed up in this simple expression that you see here, which is A into R to the power of K, where K is the number of steps, minus 1 divided by R, which is the common ratio, minus 1. That's what it is. So this is the total cost of the plan bouquet approach. This is God's approach. God is already sitting on the step. Only has to pay this cost, which is the last but one here. Okay? Because you might have to pay a little more because you jumped in beyond what was required. This is the God's cost, this is your cost. If you take the ratio of these two, you can show that this is bounded by this expression, which is R squared over R minus 1. And what is R here? R is the ratio of the common ratio of the geometric progression. If you do a simple analysis here, you can show that this expression is minimized when R equal to 2, which means that you are doubling each time. Right? And then what you will get is that if you substitute 2 here, the value gets 4. And notice that we are saying that the suboptimality will always be less than 4. No matter what is the original set of database that you had, or the initial conditions, or the estimations you made, no matter what happened, we will always be within the 4 times of God. If God took X seconds, I will finish definitely in less than 4X seconds. So now you might say that, okay, this 4 is okay for IISc, we are in a national college, we do much better than this, can't I get it to 3 or 2 also? Unfortunately, I would suggest not to waste your time doing that, because you can also show in a nice computer science theoretical effort that this is the best performance achievable by any deterministic algorithm. You cannot do better than 4. Again, modulo Rajnikant, who may be able to bring it down to less than 4, you cannot do better than 4. So this is absolutely the best algorithm that you can have. Okay. So and then in practice, does this actually work? So this is the empirical evaluation. So this has been done on some well-known industrial strength benchmarks. So I won't bore you with the details. But believe me that this is what is followed in the database industry. On the x-axis, you find different SQL queries. This is what I was telling you earlier, that you had all these SQL queries that users would give. On the y-axis, you have this worst case of optimality. That is, how much worse are you doing than ideal? If you look at today's, and again, this is on a log scale here. Okay, so that's very important. So it goes from 1, which is the best you could have, all the way to 100 million. Today's commercial systems will give you, or this is actually been done on the PostgreSQL, which is a very well-known public domain system, can give you numbers like this, which you see in red. So for example, look at this one here. It meant that the PostgreSQL system gave you an answer which was 1 million times slower than the ideal answer. The answer was the same, but it took 1 million more times to complete it. So you see several such instances here. In comparison, you look at the plan bouquet, it's always less than or around close to, at most at around 10 or so. Typically it's around 8, 7, and things like that. So you can see that the green is what we have with the plan bouquet, red is what you get with today's industrial strength systems. So now suppose you said, okay, well this is a public domain system, we didn't pay money for it, what else do you expect? We have done the same experiment with a commercial system, which I cannot name here for legal reasons. This is a commercial system, again on the log scale here, going from 1 to 10,000 here. The red lines are what you get with a commercial system, which is extremely expensive, very popular in India, that you can buy. And you can see that it's between 100 to 10,000 times slower. As I said, if you went and asked the vendor saying that, oh, my query is doing very badly, they say, you go find a better place. You don't have a better choice because we don't know how to go and do for it. Okay? So, whereas with the new approach, you can make sure that it's usually within 10 to 20, which is a much lower than the original numbers we had, which, as I said, typically will run to around 1,000 or so. So bad news is routine in the database world. We are trying to take a terrible problem and make it mildly horrible instead. So those of you who have some background in theoretical computer science may find this an interesting combination, and it actually makes it even a simple thing that any of us could understand. Just assume that there is some auction that's being held. And let's say they want to do an auction going to a diamond, okay? Because as you see, Britain is in a very bad shape. Now they might want to auction the diamond. So there is this object D with some hidden value B, and you have, let's say, some range of values, saying it's between 1 and 100. And the rule is that you can bid for this object, and what will happen is that if the bid B is less than the hidden value, which only the auctioneer knows, okay? So you'll say 10 or something like that, the auctioneer says, no, this is not enough. Then you lose the value 10 rupees, and you have to bid again. On the other hand, if your bid is larger than this value, then you have to pay the entire amount B, and then you'll acquire the object. So one approach we have to say is that, oh, I'll be a confused guy, I'll bid 1, then I'll bid 2, then I'll bid 3, 4, and so on, all the way up to 100. What would the auctioneer do? You make the value close to 100 and say that, okay, this Kohinoor diamond costs 99. What would you do? You would pay 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way to 99. So that's the sum of the first n natural numbers. We have a very large number. So then you might say, oh, okay, what I will then do is to say that I will bid very large amount. I will bid 90 itself the first time. And then the auctioneer will come back and tell you, oh, the value is only 1 rupee and I fooled you. So look at the ratio between what you paid and what's the real value, which was the B that you paid all these numbers, B1, B2 up to Bk. The final one is the bid where you actually bid more than its value and therefore you acquired the object. This is the real value, this is what you bid for it. This ratio can be shown that what is the best strategy for you now? That you should use a doubling algorithm. That is, you should bid 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, so on. That is the best way to make sure that you don't get a horrible deal in terms of hugely overpaying for something. Okay? Any other strategy would do very bad. Okay, so with this, here is just the takeaway that earlier you were assuming that given a declarative query where you specify the target, you are specifying the path, database systems were nice enough to give you magically the ideal performance. But unfortunately, there was this horrible dragon in between. We should come and say, do you know the correct estimates for all these numbers along the planned tree? So what we have done is that we have offered this in the classic Gandhigiri approach, is to say that offer a bouquet of flowers to the demon, and then what you can get is you can get near optimal performance. And for the first time, you have provable guarantees, which, as I said earlier, could not be done. You are trying best effort mechanisms, which often fail in practice. But now, in advance, you can say that my query will finish in this much of a point of time relative to the ideal solution. So, if you would like to know more about this particular project, all the details are given in this website, which is part of the IISc domain. So there is an initial concept paper which was published in the ACM SIGMOD conference in 2014. Then there was a demonstration of this technology in another top database conference called GLDB. This was in 2014, and it also got the best demo award there. And then there is the entire concept and implementations have come in the ACM transactions on database systems a couple of months ago. So all the technical details which I kind of just summarized here and didn't go into the internals would be described in these documents. So with that, I'll end my talk and be happy to host any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. This name Giant is a very illustrious name. I can reel out a few giants who are great. I'm sure he is one of them. This was a student in this giant of this college in the 60s. He was from IISc, brilliant. This one is he's been responsible for some speech coding using format, all those things are credited to him. Like that. Also, Harishta has given a brilliant talk. I'm sure the application on this in database system will be tremendous in years to come. All the best. Thank you for coming over here. Let me give what is the next program. For tomorrow there is Dr. Sachit Mail, Director in CBS. He will be speaking on a new language for biology in the 21st century. Are we equipped to speak? Perhaps he can make a contribution using this database queries. Anyway, that's it. And the day after tomorrow, Dr. Sadan and Maya celebrated Maya Foods. He will be speaking on adult rate and food and distribution. Welcome to all these programs. Now the session is open for questions. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, so I heard the question. So she's asking a very direct question, saying that how many vendors are interested? So actually, there's about half a dozen different vendors of database systems in the world. As I said, the IBMs, the Microsofts, the HPs, and so on. So they're all aware of this technology now, and in fact, in some of the companies, they're also internalizing certain versions of this. The way we have done it is to send our students to those companies. So many of them are now employed in those research groups or in the development groups, and they are implementing this idea there. But one thing that you'll often find in the database world is that unless the customer is complaining, even if there's a good technical idea, they will not implement it because they feel something else may break down. So there are non-technical reasons by which, due to which you will not touch something. So we have pointed out problems that people are unaware of. Okay? So it's like high blood pressure. You don't know you have it, you keep quiet. Okay? So in the same way, if customers are not complaining, they say, why should I try to fix the system that is not known to be broken?
But it will be very much be visible once they are implementing it and others don't implement it.
True, but the investment to implement is very substantial. Okay? And usually these people will have other commercial pressures on them to be doing alternative things. But certainly they're all well aware of it, and as I said, some of our students in a couple of these companies are actually implementing variations of this within the systems.
A lot of optimizations are possible, no?
Oh, absolutely, yes. In fact, I just touched the tip of the iceberg here. So one very simple optimization that you could do, for example, is instead of using deterministic algorithms, you could use randomized algorithms. That will bring it down from 4 to something like 3. Okay? There are lots of other, in fact, if you read the ACM transactions paper, all the other masala that you were asking about is present there. And you can do various kinds of tricks to make the numbers come down even further than that. So I just showed you the high level what you needed to do to get to a level of 4, but you can bring it down lower than that.
It sounded absurd, sir. It's very big yet.
Okay, can you make it like a software algorithm? You know, Karmarkar made a linear programming n-dimensional algorithm. Can you make something so that?
Yes, in fact, as I said, we have shown this demo on top of both commercial database systems as well as on top of public domain systems. One of the other things which I didn't mention in response to her is that, see, all this is being done from outside the database system. So we are sitting here, and this is a layer above it, which means it makes it very easy for implementation, which I kind of skipped over here when I mentioned this, is that it's very easy to deploy correctly. You can put it as a layer which sits above the database engine, but if you are willing to go inside the database engine, then we can even show other properties. So this is another way of improving on the bounds that we had. You can show alternative properties if you are willing to go inside and tinker with the engine itself. So the implementations have been, as I said, shown in this demonstration, which is here. So this is the actual code that has been developed and demonstrated to various groups, both academic and industrial research groups all over the world.
Have you not patented it?
Okay, so our belief is that patenting doesn't work in the database world. Why? Because it is not a mass market thing in the sense that we are addressing the database developers, not the database users. Database users will take whatever they get because they have no choice. We are addressing, and there are exactly 6 vendors in the world. And these are people with very deep pockets. and exceptionally good lawyers. You would never be able to fight with them. So he said, what we have done is to use again the Gandhigiri approach to say, we'll give it to you free. But in return, can you start funding our lab? So we have done an indirect mechanism where many of them, and to give them all credit, is that they have put in a lot of money in our lab. But it's not a quid pro quo saying that I've developed this, you give me a patent for it, and based on royalties of this is what we will run it on. Because they all have very large groups of software engineers, and they can develop it on their own. In fact, one of the companies actually told our student who worked on the earlier version of this, is to say that you pointed out the problem, we'll hire you, you come and fix it, because that's your difficult. So we have done this in a more informal sense, because there is no way that you can deal with large-scale software vendors sitting in the US. It's impossible to do it. Yeah. It's not a mass market kind of a thing. Unlike something like, let's say, if you do a medical kit or something, then everybody's going to be using it. Here there are exactly 6 large vendors in the world. They have their own ways to run things. So it's much better for us to be nice to them rather than to take this approach.
You started off with the Commonwealth Games example. And it seems a remarkable coincidence that the 2 figures that you got were very close to the geometric mean of the 2. Perhaps my mind is rather rusty. I don't understand why it should be the geometric mean rather than some. But that's a minor point. I want to
the rest of the talk,
Yeah.
geometric things work.
Yeah, okay.
Because the overestimation is usually the same as the level of
For that
underestimation.
reason.
That's the reason.
Yeah. But more in, shall we say, substantive question is, there are many situations where you don't have access to these kinds of database systems, where you're doing it in your head. And I'm thinking of, let's say, driving in Bangalore traffic. Now, a very experienced driver, see, when the task is simple at 2 o'clock in the morning, the best driver is almost as bad as the worst driver, or the other way around.
Yeah, the roadside thing.
Yeah. But if it's raining or if there are some other problems, etc., one of the things that I've noticed people do, and I'm not talking only of traffic here, is that you always, at the back of your mind, have alternative routes. So you're thinking of what you can do if you see or appear to see something. So you take what appears to be an apparently suboptimal route from the word go.
Yes.
That is, you know that if there are 3 drops of rain, there are going to be traffic jams in Bangalore. So you don't take the standard thing, you do something. Now, the reason that I'm asking you that is, I recently, this was just last month, was in Madras, and I still use the word name Madras. At a large Madras-based company, someone has put in a database system which was developed individually by him, which seems to operate much better than commercial systems that they've bought from, I think, the same vendor that you were not identifying. And I wonder whether that is purely a matter of coincidence that he is close to God, or whether there is something else involved. This is a large company with a large number of products. You know, we're not talking about 3 characteristics that you need to handle. We're talking about perhaps hundreds. I wondered whether you want to comment on that with respect to the question that I asked earlier, which was that perhaps there are intrinsic concepts which cannot easily be captured formally, which form the basis for such estimation techniques, if I can call them that.
Right. So actually what I wanted to mention here is that it's very important to go in the direction we have shown. We are not doing a random trial and error. We are saying make a small investment right now, then double the investment and so on. You cannot go, for example, in the reverse direction, saying I make a huge investment and come backwards. So the critical point here is to say that I first throw an arrow and see whether it works or not. If it doesn't, I show something larger, and so that step-by-step progression is very important. That's the reason it allows us to do the bounding. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. If you did a random trial and error, saying just let me pick a number out of the hat and see whether it works or not. So this small investment basis, as I said, has analogy in the online bidding problem, where given an arbitrary object whose value you don't know, and you are expected to bid for it, what is your ideal bidding strategy? So that is what was shown here, saying how should you bid, because finally it's up to the auctioneer to decide the value of the object. So if you bid very high, you'll say that it's actually the value is very low, I'll prove you and so on. If you bid very low, he'll say the actual object was very high, you have to build your way up through it, it's a very large number. So if you follow this doubling algorithm, it says that each time I fail, I will then double the investment. That gives you the best possible mechanism.
Even better than a bit tripling or algorithm.
Yes, and better than any other algorithm. So this, in fact, you can also show that you cannot do better than this under any circumstances.
So this assumption and trail and error, how it is assumptions and trail and errors. So will it work out satisfactorily or it fails?
As I showed you even in the empirical studies, we can do far better than what is happening in today's industrial strength database systems. Not that they're doing a silly job, it's a very difficult problem, but they are trying to say that here is a tough problem and I'll try to do better and better on it. And what we have said is, treat the tough problem as impossible to solve, move it away, go and solve something else instead. And while you're trying to solve the other problem, collaterally you solve the original problem. So if you try to hit your head directly against the main problem, you're not able to do it. But if you solve something else, so this is a classical Indian approach. If you have a difficult, if some institution not running well, what do? You don't fix the institution. You might start a new institution, hoping the previous one will die. Right? So here is what you're also saying is that this problem, don't even touch it. Give up on it. Try something else. Indirectly, the original problem gets solved as a collateral benefit from the secondary problem. If you hit it head on, you're in trouble. But if you do an end run around it, then you will be able to get solution. Right. So that's the key idea here, is to dispense with the problem rather than trying to come up with better solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.